The Treaty of Versailles, a comprehensive chronological breakdown. Phase 1. The Road to Negotiation, November 1918 to January 1919. November 11, 1918, Armistice Day. At 11 a.m., after 4 years of devastating warfare that claimed millions of lives, the guns fell silent across Europe. Germany, exhausted and starving, surrendered to the Allied forces. The immediate cause was the collapse of German military morale, food shortages that had reduced the civilian population to desperation, and widespread strikes and mutiny among German sailors and soldiers. Kaiser Wilhelm II, recognizing that his position was untenable, fled to Holland on November 9, 1918. A new government formed in Berlin, the Weimar Republic, led by Friedrich Ebert, and formally signed the armistice, ending active combat. However, this was not the end of the process. It was merely the beginning of the most ambitious peace conference in history. The document that would follow would prove far more consequential than the gunfire itself. November 1918, December 1918. Preliminary discussions. In the weeks following the armistice, world leaders began preparing for peace negotiations. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson had commissioned approximately 150 academics to research likely topics of diplomatic discussion and to develop a framework based on his 14 points. A comprehensive vision for lasting peace that emphasized transparency, national self-determination, and the creation of an international organization to prevent future conflicts. This document would become the moral foundation for Wilson's position at the conference, though it would clash sharply with the punitive ambitions of the European allies. Meanwhile, in France, Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau, nicknamed the Tiger, was preparing a very different framework. Having witnessed his nation devastated twice by German aggression, Clemenceau wanted nothing less than to cripple Germany permanently. British Prime Minister David Lloyd George took a middle position, recognizing that a destroyed Germany could destabilize all of Europe, fostering communism or renewed chaos, yet also facing British public demand for German punishment. Phase 2. The Paris Peace Conference opens. January 1919. January 18, 1919. The conference convenes. On this date, rich with symbolic meaning, it marked the anniversary of the German Empire's proclamation in 1871 in the Hall of Mirrors. Delegates from 32 countries representing 27 nations gathered in Paris. The choice of Paris itself was controversial. Wilson had initially proposed Switzerland, but Clemenceau, as Lloyd George recalled, wept and protested so much that we gave way, insisting that Paris, a city that had barely escaped German occupation, remain the center of the proceedings. This decision meant that the conference would unfold in an atmosphere charged with French emotion and desire for revenge, hardly conducive to moderation. A total of 70 delegates initially participated in the negotiations. However, a crucial exclusion shaped the entire process. Germany was not invited to participate in the discussions. No German negotiators would sit at the table. Russia, too, was excluded due to the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and the Bolshevik withdrawal from the war. This meant that the Central Powers would not negotiate their own fate, but would instead receive terms dictated to them, a diktat, as the Germans would bitterly call it. January 12th. Preliminary meeting of the Big Four. Before the formal conference opened, the heads of government and foreign ministers of France, Britain, the United States, and Italy held a preliminary meeting on January 12, 1919. Here, Clemenceau, Lloyd George, Wilson, and Vittorio Emanuele Orlando established themselves as the primary decision-making body. It was decided that they themselves, along with Japanese representatives, would constitute the Supreme Council, or Council of Ten, which would monopolize all major decisions. Early January. Formation of working bodies. The conference established an extraordinary array of commissions to study specific problems. The organization of the League of Nations and its covenant, the determination of responsibility for the war, reparations, international labor legislation, territorial questions, financial and economic matters, naval and military restrictions, and numerous other issues. Each commission involved experts, geographers, military advisors, historians, economists, and jurists, who would draft recommendations to be reviewed by the leaders. Phase 3. The Council meetings begin. January to March 1919. January 18th to February, the Council of Ten debates. The initial meetings of the Council of Ten proved cumbersome and ineffectual. The Council became bogged down in discussions with representatives of the states aspiring to international recognition, each presenting their requirements and territorial claims. According to historical accounts, these discussions were marked by an absence of decisions, and by lengthy hearings that consumed weeks without producing concrete results. By the end of March 1919, only the military clauses had been definitively agreed upon. Germany would be limited to an army of 100,000 men, forbidden tanks, heavy artillery, submarines, and aircraft, and the left bank of the Rhine would be demilitarized. Late January, Wilson's League of Nations Commission. On February 3, 1919, President Wilson was appointed to chair a commission tasked with defining the terms of the Covenant of the League of Nations. This was Wilson's paramount concern, the creation of an international organization that would prevent future wars through collective security, dispute resolution, and diplomatic cooperation. Wilson, supported by his closest aide, Colonel Edward House, began elaborating a draft covenant, incorporating ideas from British representatives Jan Smuts and Robert Cecil, as well as French delegates Léon Bourgeois and Ferdinand Larnaud. February 14, 1919. Wilson presents the League Covenant. By this date, Wilson had presented to the Peace Conference a draft covenant based on proposals by American lawyers David Hunter Miller and Cecil Hurst, which incorporated ideas from Wilson, House, Cecil, and Smuts. This draft would become the foundation of the final covenant, though it was not yet adopted. Wilson then temporarily returned to the United States to gather support for his plan, a move that would prove crucial, for his political opponents at home were already mobilizing against him. February 19, 1919. An assassination attempt on Clemenceau. In a dramatic moment that could have altered history, Clemenceau was shot by an assassin on February 19, 1919, but survived the attack. The attempted murder did nothing to soften his resolve. If anything, it reinforced his conviction that Germany must be utterly neutralized. Clemenceau would return to the negotiations with even greater determination. Late March, the crisis point. By late March 1919, the conference faced a critical juncture. Public opinion in all nations demanded results, yet the leaders remained deadlocked over key issues. The precarious political situation in Central Europe, particularly Bela Kun's rise to power in Hungary, added urgency to the proceedings. Lloyd George and his advisors recognized that the inefficient Council of Ten structure had to change. Phase 4. The Fontainebleau Memorandum and the Critical Shift, March 24th to April 1919. March 25, 1919. Lloyd George issues the Fontainebleau Memorandum. On this date, David Lloyd George issued the famous Fontainebleau Memorandum, warning his colleagues that a peace that was too harsh would create a dangerous, resentful Germany. Lloyd George feared that excessive punishment would destabilize Europe, potentially driving Germany into the arms of Bolshevism or leading to renewed conflict. He urged moderation and balance, a position that opposed Clemenceau's calls for punitive terms. March 24th to April 1919. The Council of Four takes over. Frustrated with the inefficiency of the Council of Ten, the four great leaders decided to conduct negotiations in secret. The Council of Four was formally established, comprising Wilson, Clemenceau, Lloyd George, and Orlando, who joined on March 24th. These four men met twice daily, almost without interruption, from March 24th to June 28, 1919, in 145 closed sessions in total. Here, with only an interpreter present initially, and later with the British Cabinet Secretary Sir Maurice Hankey recording their decisions, they would make all the major decisions that would shape the treaty. Early April 1919. The decisive week and the near collapse. During the first week of April 1919, the conference nearly collapsed entirely. Deep divisions erupted among the Allies themselves. Wilson strongly opposed the French claims over the Tsar, which Clemenceau demanded as compensation for destroyed French coal mines. Wilson also attempted to block Lloyd George's extensive definition of reparations, which included not only material damages, but also military costs and pensions, a much larger figure than Wilson believed Germany could or should pay. The tensions became so severe that Wilson prepared the U.S. presidential yacht, the George Washington, for a potential early return to the United States, signaling that the American president was prepared to abandon the conference if his principles were not respected. Mid-April 1919. The Compromise on the Rhine and the Tsar. By mid-April, a breakthrough emerged from the impasse. A compromise was reached on the Rhineland issue. Clemenceau accepted a 15-year occupation of the left bank of the Rhine by Allied forces, after which France would withdraw if Germany complied with the treaty's terms. Additionally, Clemenceau obtained a security treaty from both Britain and America, guaranteeing French protection in case of a German attack. On the Tsar, Germany agreed to yield control to the League of Nations for 15 years, while France gained ownership of the Tsar coal mines, a rich industrial prize that would partially compensate France for its destroyed resources. Late April. The Italian crisis. Just as the French-American dispute was being resolved, a new crisis threatened to tear apart the conference. Vittorio Orlando and his delegation insisted on claiming Fiume, an Adriatic port city, based on the secret Treaty of London of 1915, which had promised Italy extensive territorial gains. Wilson, committed to his principle of national self-determination, refused to grant Fiume to Italy, arguing that it was inhabited by South Slavs who should determine their own fate. Orlando, feeling betrayed and humiliated by the American president, withdrew from the conference in protest. The Italian delegation stormed out precisely at the moment when the German enemy was arriving at Versailles to receive their assigned treaty. April 28, 1919. The League of Nations Covenant is approved. While these territorial disputes raged, a major achievement was recorded. The Peace Conference unanimously approved a revised draft of the Covenant of the League of Nations on April 28, 1919. This represented a triumph for Wilson, though he had been forced to make compromises with his European colleagues. The Covenant, with 26 articles, would be included in the Treaty of Versailles itself, making them inseparable. The League of Nations was thus formally created on this date, though it would not become fully operational until after the treaty was ratified. Phase 5. The German delegation arrives in the Diktat, late April through May 1919. Late April, the Germans arrive at Versailles. After weeks of negotiations conducted without their participation, the German delegation finally arrived in Paris in late April 1919. They were not invited to Paris earlier, but were summoned at the very end of the process, a deliberate strategy by the Allies to prevent the Germans from driving wedges between the Allied powers and to deny them any opportunity to negotiate. May 7th, 1919, 3 p.m. The treaty is presented. On this date, at 3 p.m. at the Trianon Palace Hotel in Versailles, the German delegation was assembled to receive the completed treaty. The atmosphere was cold and formal. Clemenceau, speaking in French, addressed the German representatives with these stark words, as interpreted for them. Gentlemen, plenipotentiaries of the German Empire, it is neither the time nor the place for superfluous words. You have before you the accredited plenipotentiaries of all the small and great powers, united to fight together in the war that has been so cruelly imposed upon them. The time has come when we must settle our accounts. You have asked for peace. We are ready to give you peace. We shall present to you now a book which contains our conditions. The treaty was presented as a complete document with no opportunity for negotiation. A book of conditions, not a set of proposals. The Allied leaders made clear that the Germans would be given time to examine it and submit questions, but the fundamental terms were non-negotiable. Clemenceau concluded ominously. This second Treaty of Versailles has cost us too much not to take on our side all the necessary precautions and guarantees that that peace shall be a lasting one. 3. German response and protests. The German delegation, led by Count Ulrich von Brockdorff-Rantzau, was shocked by the harshness of the terms. The treaty was a comprehensive humiliation. Germany was assigned full responsibility for the war, stripped of 13% of its pre-war territory and all overseas colonies, militarily crippled, and burdened with astronomical reparations. May 7th, Brockdorff-Rantzau's counterattack. When allowed to respond, Brockdorff-Rantzau made a speech protesting the War Guilt Clause, Article 231, which placed sole blame for the conflict on Germany and her allies. He argued passionately, "To acknowledge that we alone are guilty of having caused the war in my mouth would be a lie." He emphasized that Germany had not sought this war, that the conflict had been cruelly imposed upon Germany as much as upon the Allies, and that the treaty contradicted the very principles, transparency, national self-determination, that President Wilson had proclaimed. The Allies were not moved. The American diplomat John Foster Dulles, who had helped draft Article 231, would later regret the wording, believing it had unnecessarily inflamed German resentment. But at the time, the clause stood firm. May 7th to May 29th. The weeks of German pleading. Over the following 3 weeks, the German delegation submitted numerous objections, counter-proposals, and pleas for moderation. They argued that the reparations were economically impossible to pay, that the territorial losses were unjust, and that the military restrictions left Germany defenseless against potential enemies. On May 29, 1919, the Germans submitted formal counterproposals attempting to modify the most objectionable articles, especially regarding reparations, the war guilt clause, and military restrictions. Late May, the Allied ultimatum. The Allies rejected every German counterproposal. On June 17th, the Allies issued an ultimatum. Germany had 5 days to decide whether to sign the treaty unconditionally or face the resumption of hostilities. This was not a negotiation, but a capitulation ultimatum. If Germany refused, the Allies threatened to occupy the Ruhr industrial region and renew the war.